Tonight's topic is something that shouldn't be too hard for me, seeing as it's my own personal vocation story leading up to how I ended up in Galway. But in another sense, it's quite a difficult thing for me to do, because I'm used to talking on other topics and keeping it away from any self-consciousness or anything like that. That'd be easier for me. But sure, look, if it helps anybody, if it gives any insights, or if it's just interesting, great. So, just I suppose I'm in Galway, working mainly in youth ministry. That was always that is my main focus. I'm not a priest, so I'm not doing sacramental ministry. And I to be honest, I was never drawn to sacramental ministry, because when I was growing up, I think it's important to have something modelled for you. I think it's very important to have strong role models in the church that young people can aspire to, because that has a strong bearing on what you desire yourself. It's the logic of the incarnation. We incarnate Christ to other people, and so we a lot of the time, even I know in our own order, the Franciscans, most people that end up join because they meet a friar. It's not something usually theoretical. So for me, going to Mass at home never really lit any fires for me. And when I was younger, it didn't really appeal to me that much, even though we were a family that went every week. It wasn't something that I aspired to, but I was prayerful in my younger years. I think my mother and my grandmother, probably my two grandmothers, modelled that for me in their own gentle way. But when I was in school, at home, and from Ballinamore, County Leitrim, it never factored. I only really started to take my faith a little bit more seriously when I had to move away from Ballinamore, and I changed schools in 4th and 5th year, and I got a little bit of a kick up the backside, and that was good for me at that time, because it made me think, what I wanted. It made me think about, why I was acting the way I was, why I was maybe unhappy, even though I didn't know it was unhappiness. But it was there at about 16 years old, where it was a boarding school, and we were I was preparing for the reading in Mass. We used to have Mass once a week, I think, or once a month or something like that, in the morning. And it was my turn to read, and I went down to read beforehand. And it was St. Paul's letter to the Romans. I think it's Romans 10 or something like that. I think it's 10:12. Be not lagging in zeal, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. And for some reason, it just hit me. Intuitively, in the heart, in the head, everything, because it resonated with something that I wanted. I wanted to be fervent in spirit. I didn't want to be half asleep. I wanted to have something to do. I was a young lad, I had lots of energy, and I wanted to be able to give my life to something. And I could tell I wanted to actually give my life to something that I intuited a long time before in my life that should be God as a childlike faith. And it was only when I read this thing that I realised I want to find more about my faith. So I started a bit of a journey then and I started to read the scriptures. And that was the big thing for me. It was, someone gave me a little Gideon's Bible when I was in first or second year or something like that, and I dug it out then, 4 or 5 years after that, and I started reading it, and it's very handy because it has 2 indexes at the front. One of them is where to find help when, and there's a whole load of scripture passages, there's a whole load of headings, so where to find help when friends fail, and a couple of scripture passages, family fail, all the rest of it. And then there was another index, teaching about some of life's problems, and you'd have a heading and a few more. And it was just excellent because you could go straight into the scripture passage and it would speak into exactly what I was going through, and that's how I went on. And I started to find more about the scriptures, and that was really when my prayer life started to take off. And it was then around this period that I started to think about not priesthood per se. It started off as a desire to give my life to something worthwhile, and for me at that stage it was to do development work overseas, work for an NGO, and so I decided to become a civil engineer so that I could actually go out there and use a skill. But that was my Christian commitment, essentially. So I chose engineering, and I went to University of Galway here, AUI at the time it was called. But so I started off in NUIG, and I went through first year, but I started to see myself slipping back into my old ways with friends and the nightlife and all the rest of it. And towards the end of that year, I thought, I don't want to go back there. I want to stick to my commitments, my Christian commitments. And I could see, that actually it's going to be hard enough in life to stick to them. It's getting harder all the time. And it was then that I thought to myself, I could become a priest. I could do, give my life to this, and I could live on my own, I thought, So I thought about it extensively that summer, but it didn't really fit for me because it was just too much to take on, because the church was in a terrible place. Well, actually, that didn't really bother me at all. It was that I was never modelled a good style of priesthood back at home. It was just so out of touch with young people. It just did not attract me at all. There was no young people in the churches. And, the priests were probably coming to the schools the odd time, but it didn't, and it would have, it would have been a massive hill for me to surmount, to get over, to be able to tell anybody at that stage, at 19 years old, this is what I want to go to the seminary. I thought about it many times, and I just picturing myself trying to tell, the fellas in the football team, that would have been probably the hardest for me. And in fact, that was a big, even 7 or 8 years later when I did do it, that was still a difficult thing for me. So I didn't. I went back to my old idea of, how to get married, raise a Christian family, and work in the developing world. So I qualified and worked for 2 years in Dublin on the Lewis, building the Lewis, and then it was time for me to go, and I got my placement. And, things fall into place, and I believe this is a big thing for me, looking at the signposts throughout my life and seeing God in them, because God is the God of history, and we can rely on our life experiences to bring to memory what God has done in our lives. I'm a big believer in that. The way things fall into place is just Like even for example, like today, I was I just decided to go down to the church for a while before we close up. It was about 20 to 6, I'd say, and we have evening prayer at 6. And this man kind of stumbled into the church, and he came over to me and he started asking me, am I a priest, and would I be there for the mass tomorrow, and things like that. Then I thought to myself, he's got a Dublin accent. I remember about this time last year talking to a guy who had a Dublin accent who came up for the anniversary mass of his father. And this guy would be about mid-70s. And he came up last year, I remember, and had a great conversation with him. He was a lovely guy. He came up on the train for the mass and went back down that day, and I thought it was the loveliest thing. And this guy had aged so much. I said, were you here last year by any chance for the anniversary mass of your father? And he says, yes, that's the mass I'm talking about tomorrow. I came up the night before this year to spend a little bit more time because I have cancer, and I'm going to go to the mass, and I want you to pray for me. And I thought, I should, I never usually be down at the church at that time, because we close up after evening prayer, and this guy was there, So I know things happen for a reason. So for me, I remember even in my I go back again in my interview for Saya Construction. That was the construction company that I started off with. The guy that interviewed me for the job was like a site agent who was probably lower down the pecking order. He employed me. He put me on this project, and in the meantime, in 2 years, he had risen to probably contracts manager or something. I think he might have been even a director this time. He was a whiz kid and a great guy. And we went to the summer party in Shelburne, and we're just up at the bar, and I was just ordering a pint, and he came up to me and he said, Roan, how are you doing? I hadn't spoken to him since the interview 2 years before, and he said to me, when are you heading off? I says, what do you mean? He says, I remember when you were in the interview, and you said to me that you're only going to be here for 2 years to get enough experience to be able to go out and do this work. And I said to him, that's incredible. Well, you're the first person I'm going to tell about this, but I met somebody from El Salvador about a month ago, and I had decided to go to El Salvador in November, and I hadn't told anybody, not even my family or anything, but he was the guy that I was going to have to tell anyway at some stage, and that was it. So things happen for a reason. So I ended up in El Salvador, and I was working out there, and this was my kind of dream, to be able to go out there to meet somebody and get married, somebody that would be, a Christian, committed, and also committed to the poor, and committed to this kind of work, and so we could do this kind of thing. And I did, in the end, meet somebody out there. But previous to that, the whole priesthood thing came back to me. Or just, I suppose, the prayer thing. I was out there about 7 or 8 months. The rainy season hit, and the guy that I was, the Cork fellow that I went out there with, had a girlfriend that time, a new girlfriend, so he was away with her the whole time, and I was stuck doing nothing because we couldn't work during the rainy season. And I started thinking to myself, what was it really all about? I mean, I'm not helping anybody here. And I started to think about the priesthood again. But again, I put it to the side, and I met this girl then who was also working out there, or had been working out there, and she was from England, and she would come back. So we were together. But the next thing that happened was that I went back to Ireland for Christmas after about 2.5 years, and my parents, were getting older, and and I kind of saw them in a new light. And I was thinking about marriage seriously at that time as well. But I could see all of my siblings had fled the coop at that stage. My brother was in Australia, my sisters were all living outside, you know, and they were going to settle elsewhere as well. And I thought to myself, I really want to do the work I'm doing. I want to be free to do it. I want to, and I want a life of prayer. It became more and more important to me. And that Christmas, I just went down to visit the Franciscans in Killarney, and something happened to me, and I didn't expect it to happen to me. I just felt at home. It's hard to even describe. And I went back out to El Salvador after Christmas, and you know, I couldn't shake it off. And so I decided that I was going to break it off with my girlfriend, because I didn't want for us to, you know, be a couple of years down the line and for me to say, you know, I can't stop thinking about this thing. So I said to myself, I have to give it a go now. And that's when I decided to go for the Franciscans. And that, so I kind of worked for another year and a half to get my projects finished and everything like that. And came home to Ireland, and you know, went down to the novitiate, or the postulancy in Killarney, and I was just, you know, gung-ho about the solidarity with the poor. I was fasting, I was trying to go out looking for people that were homeless. I was, you know, I just couldn't get into this enough. And I was talking about El Salvador the whole time, speaking about all the different things that were going on out there to people. And, you know, they didn't have the same experiences as me. So they after a while, they didn't hear about it at all. So I stopped talking about it, and I stopped thinking about it. And I gave it a chance. And I actually got sick in the second year that I was there from a parasite that I got in El Salvador, and been quite sick for about maybe 2 years. So much so that I didn't know where it was, I didn't know what I was going to be able to do, and I didn't have the same life in me to have the courage nearly to think about El Salvador or anything like that. I had to give up everything. I was completely stripped of, you know, I wasn't able to sleep, I wasn't able to eat, I wasn't able to think properly, I wasn't able to sort of be socially good either in these circumstances. I had to let go of everything. But in that, I think I was sort of refined a little bit. I was made into more of a blank slate so that I could actually move where the Spirit was leading me. And slowly but surely, my desire to help the poor morphed into helping young people, because I could see that in our culture, young people are under serious pressure. Meaning is so important for people's lives, and I could see there was a dearth of meaning with the old traditional morals taken away, Christian morals, boundaries were taken away. There isn't the same sense of purpose for young people. And I see, I was a chaplain in ATU, and I can see it even more starkly there. You know, it's just as religion doesn't even enter the door there. And that's when I started to gear more towards youth work. And I started to dream about it maybe when I was 1, 2, 3, 4 years in. I started doing philosophy, and I started doing my own youth work in the friary in Athlone, and it was just really, really liked it. And it just started to tuck off, you know, things were put in my way. And then I went to Italy, and that was kind of difficult enough, you know, seeing some of the stuff that used to go on in Rome. It I wouldn't be a big person for the ceremony, and you know, it just seeed like it was the wrong place for me. And someone suggested that I go to Assisi to see what they're doing with the young people up there, and I went up to Assisi, and they put on 5 or 6 day kind of courses. Corso Zero is the first one, and a vocational course is the next one, and then there's another one. And I was absolutely blown away with what they were doing there. It was all scripture, and it was all hard hitting, speaking into young people's lives. And I thought, this is what I want. This is what it resonates with me. It has impacted me so much that I want to give this gift to other people. But this is all in Italian, and I didn't know anybody else that would be able to do it with me. You definitely need somebody else, and you need someone else that knows what they're doing. And I remember the guy who was running and saying, "Oh, you should do something like this." And I remember distinctly where we were going, and I said to him, "If only, I'd love to, but sure, I can't on my own." And about 2 months later, I think most of you know Father Jacopo in the friary. 2 months later, he decided to join our province. That was the other person, because he was part of the Assisi province. He had been to all of these courses. Of course, he speaks Italian. He had done all these things. So he joins, and pretty much that was about 2 years later, we ended up moving to Ireland within a month of each other, to Galway here. And so things just work out. They fall out. Like what looked like impossible just fell into place without even trying. So that's how I ended up in Galway. That's how I ended up doing the youth work. Both of us ended up working in ATU as well, you know, and I'm not even working there anymore, but I still meet up. Like last night I met up with a lot of my ex-colleagues in there who came into the friary to look at the cribs, and we had a long discussion afterwards about the friars, about our life, about, you know, even though they've asked us numerous times before, but they're just so interested, you know, asking, "So can you decide where you're going to go?" So they could send you anywhere, and how long do you have here, and this, that, and the other. And it's just, we're there, and they're able to ask these questions. And then last Saturday or Sunday night, there was a concert in aid of the Simon community, and it was the ATU choir who organised it, who I was part of, and very, very close to. And I got a lovely email there yesterday from somebody who would not be in any way into the church at all, and it was just, she couldn't have been more thankful for the friars, for the abbey, and the feel of the place and everything like that. You know, these are the things that it's like leaven working its way through the dough that people experience about the church, and instead of it being something that they have to do, it becomes something that attracts them, that appeals to them, that models something to them. And I'm not saying I'm modeling anything to them, but it's just, it's God doing these things. It's the Lord leading everything that happens. So I suppose, to kind of sum it up a little bit, and then I don't know how long. Oh, do I have plenty of time? Yeah. Okay.
Give it 15 minutes.
15 minutes. Yeah. Okay. So that's kind of it in a you know, an overview, a general overview. But I suppose for myself, I started off in Galway in 2002, and I found myself back here in 2020. So 18 years later, and I didn't even know the friary was a friary when I was here. I thought it was a post office because it looked like the GPO in Dublin. And, you know, there was a lot, like, I was just living the university life, and to find myself back in Galway as a friar after all those years was just providential, really, you know. So it was like coming home and then dealing with the same, you know, a lot of the same types of people and things like that. It was a blessing. But I had to go through the other things first because, you know, I could have joined when I was 19, the first time I thought about it. And I used to think, you know, why didn't I join at that stage? You know, I wasted 6 years or 7 years of my life, or more. I joined 9 years of my life. But nothing is waste because I'm using the experience that I have had in El Salvador as a friar now, as in what I'm doing. Because in El Salvador it was extremely hands-on and anything that you could do, or you could do anything really. You know, like in terms of construction, I was the project manager, I was the carpenter sometimes, I was the draftsman, the architect, and I had to do all these things. But I had done the 2 years experience in Ireland before I got to El Salvador, and it gave me the courage to be able to do these things, and I just hit the ground running out there really. And I don't think if I went to El Salvador that I would have ended up somewhere, but it wouldn't be where I am now today, because of the experiences that I had out there. The little wake-up calls that made me seriously think about joining the priesthood, or joining the seminary. And that was another thing as well. I didn't even know there were orders. I barely knew anything about the Catholic Church, to be honest. It was only scripture and my own personal prayer when I was in El Salvador. And, you know, but I was still a nominal Catholic. And for all I knew, I was a full Catholic, you know. I was going to Mass and everything like that, but, you know, I was never going to confessions. And I didn't even know what adoration was. Because, you know, I'd never seen it at home. And, you know, I'll go back to the experience of when I was going out with that girl and I was going home for Christmas, and it looked like everything was going right for me, and I met the perfect person who was doing exactly what, you know, I had planned, I had foreseen everything, and just the combination of events that Christmas, which made me seriously think about what I'm doing, made me wake up to what I really wanted. Because as a young man, as a 28-year-old, I want everything, you know, or I want what the world tells me I should want. And, you know, it looks good, you know, marry, raise a Catholic family, and do this great work. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Isn't that what the world needs? Isn't that what the church needs? Isn't that what everyone else would clap you on the back and say, fair play to you, more like it? That's probably more what it is. Or that's a big part of it. There was a lot of kudos with that. It was acceptable. But it wouldn't have made me happy in the sense that I'm happy now. It wouldn't have aligned with who God made me. You know, I was created a certain way, and we're all unique, and you know, it just fits me more, even though there's always questions asking me, why are you doing this? Why don't you do that? And people that just don't understand, and sometimes I don't understand myself, and I have to try hard to remember when God showed me that it was for me, and bring it to mind all the time. But when I do, and when I am myself, and when I'm on my own, and I'm able to pray, and I do rely on experience. I do rely, I entrust myself to experience. I entrust myself to the scriptures for guidance. I entrust myself to the hand of God acting in my life. I entrust myself to the community of God. We take a vow of obedience. I entrust myself to our superiors, and God has given me these things to sort of live by. So I don't know.
Does anybody want to ask one a question now? While you have the chance.
Why did you feel it was the Franciscans particularly that was you were drawn to rather than any others?
Yeah. I kind of left out that part purposely so that I didn't want to cloud it too much with information. So, you remember when I said that I was out there in El Salvador about 8 months and the rainy season happened and I started thinking about religious life again. And I said it, I was living with a nun, she was involved in charge of the project. And I said it to her, and she said to me, well, why don't you go down and speak to this Irish priest who is just after arriving in our local capital? And she didn't say anything about Franciscan or anything. And this guy had retired to Ireland previous to that, maybe a year before that. And as soon as he got home, he decided, no, I want to live out the rest of my days in Central America. And they posted him to Guatemala. But the priest in our local capital wasn't liked by the people. And so they decided to switch Alfie with him, and he ended up in the local town. Yeah. And the other guy wasn't Irish. And so I went down to see him just as a priest. And nearly more than anything else as another Irish person, because there was very few Irish people there. And just when I met him, he was wearing one of these. And little by little, I found out who the Franciscans were. And I found out, that not everybody is a priest. The way of life, the fraternity. For me, I do have like my freedom, and I think I can live on my own fairly well. But I don't think I'd like diocesan life, because I like to have, a team around me. I like to have a community, and that really resonated with me. And also, I said that the scriptures were very important for me, and prayer. And I used to do a lot of that out in nature. I live in the country, and so nature is very, very important for me. And that was also a big thing with the friars. And then the way things happened, that would have been, about nearly three years before I actually came home to join the Franciscans. When I decided to join the Franciscans, I stayed out for another about year and a half, and the vocations director advised me to go into spiritual direction at some stage before I joined the friars, and I kept on putting on the wrong finger. And anyway, about 6 months passed, and I came home for another Christmas, and on the way back out, it's El Salvador. I stopped off in New York to visit a priest who was helping us in El Salvador, and he found out that I was thinking about joining the Franciscans. As he said to me, sure, why don't I bring you down to visit the Franciscans down in I forget what street it was in Manhattan. But first, there's another group of Franciscans just down the road from me here. Should we stop in to see them? Sure, I hadn't a clue. I didn't know there was different Franciscans or anything at that stage. He was living in Newark, or Elizabeth, and about a mile down the road, the novitiate for the friars of the renewal was. And so I ended up there, and I ended up meeting them all and getting their literature and bringing it back out to El Salvador with me and reading it and thinking, this is actually for me. This is exactly, I really, solidarity with the poor was massive, working with the poor. it was, you know, I thought to myself, this is what I want to do. So I decided myself to do that in about January, and I was supposed to be joining the friars the following June. And the months went by, and I was deciding this thing. But anyway, I decided to go to find this spiritual director, to go for one at least, to see what's going on. And I went down to him in San Salvador, and he didn't really seem that interested. It was all in Spanish, and so I was chatting away, and he was just it was kind of like, he wasn't even looking at me. He was kind of, I remember he was sitting at the other side of the room. He was kind of staring over there, and I was this way, and and I wasn't going to tell him my idea about joining the CFRs at all. I was, I'd made my own mind up. But he didn't seem to be listening. So I said, sure, at the end of it, I'll just kill the time, so I'll throw it in. And as soon as I said it, he turned round to me and he said, no, you've been given the straight path. You've been given the straight path. And don't be like a butterfly. Flitting around from flower to flower. That's what you're going to be like if you start trying to make different change path. This is the straight path, and I don't think anybody would be able to change my mind, but that did, just because it just seemed out of the blue. And so I went home 2 months or a month and a half later, and the psychological assessments, and then joined